So Taoism. Taoism is one of the three major Chinese spiritual traditions, along with Confucianism and Buddhism. Buddhism, of course, was imported from India, but made a very strong tradition of its own in China. Confucianism, well, we dealt a little bit with Confucius, and that's its own thing. I don't know if you'd call it a religion or not, more like a philosophy, perhaps. Taoism and the other two traditions had a rivalry, have had a rivalry that's lasted over centuries. And sometimes they were sort of uneasy allies. Sometimes people tried to kind of blend them and find common threads. Other times, different monks and priests and people like that were at each other's throats. There was sometimes one or the other of them would get persecuted. Taoism is a curious thing to even call a religion because it doesn't have anyone's face on it. The central, as you'll see when you read the Tao Te Ching, the central spiritual concept is the Tao, which we usually translate as the way. And it's not a human or anthropomorphic concept. It's not a father figure. It's not a loving god or goddess. It's nothing human-like. Even Buddhism, which doesn't, at least Buddhism has the face of the Buddha on it. If they were going to put anybody's face on Taoism, it would probably be Lao Tzu, or Lao Tzu is probably the better pronunciation, the author of the Tao Te Ching. But all that's known about Lao Tzu is that he's traditionally called the author of the Tao Te Ching. That's what they know. I mean, they don't know if he was just made up. So it doesn't have a dominant personality behind it in any sense, the way Islam has Muhammad behind it, or Christianity has Jesus, or Judaism has Abraham or Moses. And even, Hinduism doesn't have one dominant personality, but it has a bunch of them. It has various gods that have very distinctive personalities. So Taoism is funny that way. And if you read the Tao Te Ching, you'll see it's in some sense one long attempt to describe or define or perhaps induce the Tao, to get you in a place where you can think about the Tao. The Tao Te Ching might be the most widely read spiritual book. I'll call it mystical book. The Bible is very much read and very, very much a spiritual book, but it's not exactly a mystical book, though it might have mystical parts. The Tao Te Ching is, of all the mystical books, might be the most widely read. It's a very famous text. The other main one is the Zhuangzi, which is basically just the writings of Master Zhuang. And Master Zhuangzi, everybody's pretty sure existed. He's not just sort of a legendary name, the way Lao Tzu is a legendary name. Zhuangzi, they're pretty sure they knew when the guy was born and died. Now, they're not sure that all of the writings attributed to him were actually from his pen, but they think at least some of them were, and that he was a distinct personality. And you'll probably get a sense of his personality from that. He's got a whole different tone than Lao Tzu. There's a huge amount of irony in Zhuangzi, which is an interesting quality to find in a spiritual writer. That's not usually their long suit. So I wanted to have these two different flavors. The attempt to figure out what the Tao, what that word means, is a totally appropriate way to try to read this stuff. And the worldview that goes with Taoism is of interest. By the way, the terms yin and yang, which you've probably heard, those are Taoist terms. If I get a chance, I'll show you a little film that somebody made about yin and yang that I like a lot. You should probably know that in Chinese history, Taoism got associated with some very dubious practices, including people taking elixirs that were supposed to give them eternal life and, probably didn't. Some of those elixirs, people drank knowing they would kill them, and they'd pay money for this because there was a promise that if you drink this elixir, in the next world, you will hold a very high rank. You will be like a Lord Chamberlain or something. However, you're not going to find stuff like that in the Tao Te Ching. It's what I mean with any religion, you have to distinguish between the ideas and the teachings that were there at the beginning that began the whole thing and the institutions that grow up around those teachings. And I think most major religions would surprise the heck out of their founders, just in terms of the accretion of traditions and institutions. I mean, not necessarily unpleasantly surprise them, but I think it would really surprise them. And I suspect Taoism and Buddhism in the Far East, that's true of both. See if you can get a feel. These are both books that are trying to speak the unspeakable and to say the unsayable. And that's a tradition of Eastern mysticism too. The Buddha was in the same boat. How do you say what by definition can't be said? On the other hand, if you don't speak at all, how are you going to bring people to any form of enlightenment? Think about those questions as you read this book.